Yeah, thank you. So yeah, Luca just said the title, and I'm Kevin Meredith. So I'm just going to talk about my agenda. So I'm going to make a claim. I'm going to talk about my background. I'm going to talk about a critical web service for which that upgrade needed to take place, as Luca introduced. I'm going to talk about the problem involved with that upgrade. I'm going to talk about the pull request that I made in order to achieve that goal of upgrading to a stable HTTP 4S version. And I'll give some comments and talk about the content of those PRs and the choices that I made. And then finally, I'm just going to give a conclusion about the talk based on my experiences. Okay, just keeping the chat open. So my background, so I'm a team lead at Banno, and my teammates and I, we build and maintain multiple HTTP web services using the excellent HTTP 4S library. From a Scala point of view, I've been working in Scala professionally since August 2013. And then from a pure functional programming point of view, Scala Z and CATS, I've been working professionally in pure FP and Scala since February 2017 at Banno. And then that's my Twitter. Then there's a chat, and I appreciate any disagreement or criticism. So now I'm going to talk about the critical web service in question. So for this talk, I'm just going to go through the legend. So a rectangle represents a web service, and then a line represents HTTPS. So the focus of this talk is this service called this talk service, and that's an HTTP 4S web service. And it's important to the business because it provides integration with a third-party HTTP API that these other services on the left, Banno service A, B, and C, need to consume. And as a side point, this service uses the excellent Doobie library to talk to Postgres over JDBC. Okay, so the problem, and this is from this work I had done around February 2018. So this table is essentially list HTTP 4S version, whether it's supported, and then the CATS and FS2 versions that it depends on. So the problem is that this critical web service, again, at February 2018, was on an end-of-life version, so an unsupported version of HTTP 4S. So if we look at this bottom row, this web service was on 0.16. It's not supported. It was end of life, or is end of life, and it didn't use CATS or FS2. So the effect type, the FP library was Scala Z, and then the effect type was Scala Z concurrent task. So the problem is, given this is an important service, it's unacceptable for it from a business point of view and a tech point of view to be on an end-of-life version, because it's not going to enjoy the benefits of defects that are fixed as well as improvements to the library itself. So basically, I'm now going to talk about, and the also technical problem is that it's not a trivial upgrade in terms of code changes to go from 16 to 20 directly. So what I'm going to talk about now is the pull request that I made, and the guiding principle that I had is that for my pull request, each pull request merge had to then be deployed to prod. And I wanted to make those pull requests as small as possible for really two reasons: less risky deployments, as well as my teammates review this code, and we as a team own this service, and I want my teammates to understand my changes. So I want to make it easier for them by having smaller lines of code. So now what I'm going to do is walk through each of those pull requests. So the first pull request, and remember in the journey from HTTP 4S 16 to 20, is I opened a PR that upgraded HTTP 4S from 16 to 18. And what it did effectively was replace Scala Z with CATS, replace Scala Z's tag types with shapelesses, and then finally depended on a library written by my coworker, Christopher Davenport. He has a library called Scala Z Task Effect, and it essentially provides CATS effect instances for Scala Z concurrent task. So basically, I was still able to use the task effect type, and I was able to meet the requirements of 0.18 HTTP 4S in that it uses CATS effect. So for the next pull request, this was essentially a replacement of Scala Z concurrent task with CATS effect IO. So that PR, its high-level changes consisted of get rid of Scholar Z task effect, because since Scholar Z concurrent task was deleted and replaced with cats effect IO, there was no need for that library anymore. It did its duty. And then I just explained that I replaced Scholar Z concurrent task with IO. And then just as a comment, mainly due to other priorities, I opted against essentially a generic F effect type. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about, so just referencing this Cersei instances method in HTTP for S 0.18, you can see that there's a method called JSON of, it has an effect type of F that requires an implicit sync of F instance and scope. And you can see that given an A for which a decoder A exists, we can then build an entity decoder F of A. So, that's useful in given an HTTP response, I'd like to decode that into a case class so that I can manipulate it and perform some business logic. So I opted against that approach of essentially having this polymorphic F, and that was mainly due to other priorities. So I just did a straight up replacement Scholar Z concurrent task with cats effect IO. And then the final PR was upgrading from 0.18 to 0.20. And as a side note, upgraded Doobie from 0.5 to 0.7 so that the FS2 versions would match up. One side comment that doesn't apply directly to a PR, most of our services use Cersei because we deal with JSON a lot, and that's an excellent library. We had started off in this service, that is the service for which I'm talking about, the upgrade. We kept Argonaut rather than replace it with Cersei. And the main rationale for that is this service was running in prod since February 2017, and Argonaut stood the test of time, so to speak. And secondly, that was just, I judged a lower priority than that other work of getting to 0.20. But we do use Cersei in all new services, and this might actually be the only service we maintain that uses Argonaut. So the conclusion that I have is, so just to reiterate, each PR, when it got merged, kicked off to a CI build, and then it got deployed to prod. And then I just wanted to hammer home this point that from the claim that I made that pure FP is a competitive advantage, 1,000+ compile and test compile errors later, that is, if I took the sum of all the compile and test compile errors from 0.16, the first PR, to 0.20, the last PR, it deployed to prod and just worked. Now, I will have a minor caveat, and this was just my own mistake. I did have an FS2 stream error where I essentially was dealing with a never-ending stream, and that was just a code mistake on my part, and that's another excellent library, FS2. But it's just a powerful motivator to me, not only from a technical point of view, but from a business point of view, that after all of these errors, our unit test just passed, and then it went to prod and worked. And that's just awesome to me, the power of pure FP. And I just want to close with a couple years ago, I read this book, Scala in Depth by Joshua Swareth. And he says that this is a quote from his book. In his book, Imperfect C++, Matthew Wilson uses an analogy of comparing the compiler to a Batman. This Batman isn't a Caped Crusader, but is instead a good friend who offers advice and supports the programmer. And no doubt that's 100% true. So yeah, that's all I had. I didn't look at chat at all. So yeah, if anybody has a question.